My name's Charlie Vorisek. I'm from Linesville, Pennsylvania. We do beekeeping. It actually started as my oldest daughter's FFA project. So back in '92, she wanted to be an FFA, and I teased her on whether, I said, well, everybody's got hogs and Holsteins. I said, what else can you do? And I don't even remember for sure how we got onto it, but we talked. I kind of teased her about honeybees, and I didn't know anything about it either, but we learned it all together, and we probably spent a year learning about it. Back then there wasn't any classes, there really wasn't any resources, there wasn't an internet, so we pretty much researched it and just finally decided to jump into it. But she did it as an FFA project for 6 years. She started in 9th grade and went into college for 2 years. And her younger sister started it as well 4 years later. But between the two of them, there was 9 years of it. The first for 9 years was as an FFA project. During that time, I could see that I ended up being a chairperson for the Crawford County Fair for the apiary judging, and I found that there was a lot of interest. People would want to know where to buy it. They want to buy it off of the exhibit, and we don't sell it out of the exhibit. But I could see there's a lot of demand, and I thought, well, you know, I was in tool and die at the time. I did have somewhat of a farm background. We had a cow, and for the house, my dad was a farmer in the early '60s, sold a herd, but we kept a couple of milk cows, and I would milk them every morning and night before I go to school and after school. And so I've had some ag background. The kids graduated from school, but I kept it going. I bought it from my last daughter, bought her a car, a used car, and got her equipment. And but then, once it became my business, I had to pay taxes. It's like, oh, that changes the whole perspective. So now I actually have to make money and track. Not that they did good book work in FFA. That's part of what they do. They do real good book work, and but it was the kids doing it, not me. Now it was me. So anyway, in 2004, I believe, is when I took it on as a business. I was still working tool and die at that time. And then in 2009, I got laid off from my tool and die job, and I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can make this thing go. So that was the big jump off point. I felt like I could do it because it doesn't generate as much money as it might look on the outside. I mean, it's farming still. There's a lot of expense. But the kids were out of school. I didn't have that responsibility, you know, raising kids on that money. So I felt like I could try it. So we tried it, and I worked hard at it. And we got past that magic 5-year point where they say new businesses will fail most of them fail in the first 5 years. So I got past, I went to the Gannon small business classes. So I educated myself as much as I could before I jumped off into it. But it's a lot of work. We made it. It's been successful, but it's a lot of work. I don't know that it surprises me. I think you never stop learning. So at this point, I'm at 30 years. This is since '92. This is 22. It's been 30 years, and I'm still learning stuff with beekeeping that intrigues me. It's like, okay, there's something else new there, and I think the downside is I don't have a retirement. I'm 67, so I still need to keep doing it. other than my Social Security. But the upside is I've experienced things that I would never have experienced if I hadn't jumped off and tried to do that. And I've met people. Ended up becoming president of the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association for 4 years, and I'm still on the legislative committee. I'm actively, in my capacity, I met a lot of people I wouldn't meet. We work at Penn State a lot. Work Penn State projects. I've been in different Penn State studies, and working on legislation right now. So there's things I'm doing now that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So that I feel good about, because like I say, if I hadn't have tried it, I would never know. And that's what I told myself at the time. If I don't try it, I may kick myself for the rest of my life because I didn't try it. Yeah, misconceptions with beekeeping. Yeah, I think people perceive that it's a lot easier than it is. I remember one guy going like, "Oh, so you just set your hive under this locust tree and it just makes all this honey." It's like, no. First off, everything's weather dependent. One tree and one hive is just a hobby. So we run upwards of 200 colonies. That's what it takes. Right now I'm at about 130 because I'm trying to back off. But in order to make payments and you can't make all your sales off of just one or a few items. It's a volume. It's a volume where you make your money, and I've always tried to price it so that the average person can buy it. And we live in an area where it's not real lucrative with influential people, so I try to price it competitively. But yeah, so the challenge, and then it's very labor intensive. I want to pass it on to somebody, but it's very labor intensive. I spend a tremendous amount of hours out in the field just trying to understand the health of the hive. And it's hot. You're at 90 degrees, you're wearing a veil and a jacket, and you can't breathe. My typical day is I start out sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee, and I'm going through emails from the day before or things that I need to get done. If I order some things in the morning, generally during the season when we're working with bees, that we don't get into the hive too early, because the bees, we might as well let the day warm up and the bees get going before we bother them. There's less bees in the hive. But I generally try to get some administrative stuff done in the morning, and then it's never predictable. It changes. You can try to know what you want to accomplish that week. And sometimes I have to write it down and really focus to get it done. But just scheduling it I've never been able to really, and that's a difficulty because people would like to learn about beekeeping, want to follow me and help me. And I honestly can't, simply because it sounds so unpredictable. I mean, everything will change on a phone call or an email, and so if I take somebody on, then I'm going to have to give up things that I'm going to have to stop and take care of business when it happens. So it's unpredictable. It's hard to say. It's not as regular as, you have to milk cows, and everybody understands you have to milk cows a certain time of the day. And it changes through the year. So the summer season is really busy because that's the time we work our bees. And I usually find myself busy in the off season because I'm working with other events and going to state meetings and going to the farm show. And maybe about January things slow down a little bit, but by March it's getting busy again. So in the spring months I'm repairing equipment and getting equipment so that once the season starts, I don't have to stop for anything to get, if I need equipment out in the field. No, that's a fair question. No, I have thought about quitting because, like I said, I'm 67, and I know physically I've had both knees replaced, and so I had to time that with my season. So I had the surgery in October 1 year, and then I'm all recovered, and then I do the other knee the next year. But physically, you know, I feel okay, but I know the calendar tells me that I need to be paying attention to my own health, and I could get hurt out in the field. I could trip, I could break a leg, I could do anything. And I understand the older I get, the more maybe at risk that is. So I don't know how long I can physically do it because it is demanding, and I know at some point my body's just not going to cooperate. So yeah, it is concerning. And getting out of this, so it's taken us 10, 15 years to build this business. And there's nobody standing in the wings ready to step into where your markets are. So if I talk about I pulled some honey out of some Erie stores just because it's so distant, and I was running fewer colonies, but they said, oh, but where are we going to get it? Where are we going to get it? And it's hard. It's hard to replace that market if there's not somebody doing it. I think if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. Yeah, there is a certain amount, I guess of love. It's like everybody in agriculture kind of has a passion to do it because they just have a relationship with whatever it is they're working with, and they understand it, and the more you get into it, the more intriguing it is. And one of the things right now is I've been working with Penn State, actually since I was president of the State Beekeepers Association in 2012, so that's 10 years ago. We started a committee for it's a Pennsylvania Queen Bee Improvement Program. So our biggest issue is varroa mites and diseases and things that are for the health of the hive. So the mites are the biggest issue, and back then, as president, I was able to appoint 2 guys in Pennsylvania that were really into the genetics side of the honeybees. And so we're getting to a point where I really think it's starting to show a difference. I was privileged to be in a 2-year study with Penn State. It was a blind genetics study. So we had 5 queen lines, and we had 4 of each line. We had 20 hives in the study, and we only knew them by color. So we did data collection every month based on color. We do mite counts. Penn State would come and take some lab samples twice a year. And so the study was completed in April, and there's some very fascinating results out of that. I mean, I always felt like there was genetic differences, but seeing it firsthand has been like, wow. Like we had a couple of queens that are just like everything a beekeeper could wish for, like everything good. And you wouldn't think that there's that much diversity in that insect, and there is. And I guess what's fun for me is that I was in the study. I have the genetics in my boxes, and the study isn't even out and published yet, right? So I'm like this far ahead of everybody else. So those things are kind of fun, and those were I guess the science and trying to improve the industry is what I get out of it right now. I mean, we like coming to events and selling honey and having a relationship with people. So, but I think some of the scientific side has really been rewarding. And if that's something I can leave as a legacy, then yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great because I think So what we all try to do is make things better before we pass it on to somebody else. The current climate of the industry it took some strange. I've been through a lot since it started. There wasn't a lot of beekeepers in Pennsylvania, registered beekeepers, so there was like a little over 2,000 registered beekeepers when we started, and even when I first became president, we were still around that 2,500 mark. But then we experienced colony collapse, a lot of interest in beekeeping, and there isn't a growth in commercial beekeeping, but there is a growth in individuals. So we have somewhere over 6,000 registered beekeepers in the state right now. So there's a growth there, and it's at the kind of grassroots level, which is good, and it's actually spreading hives out more than if they were commercial, because commercial are basically they make their money migratory. They move from crop to crop in different states, so they're not resident in the state for very long. But with individual beekeepers, they're more resident. They're in their backyards. There's a lot of growth in suburban areas and interest in that. But I think the industry is pretty good. The price for honey is good. I can make a living on it. They always said, well, you can't make a living off of that. You can if you do it right. You have to. You can't. You're not going to get real rich. You're not going to get rich on it. But as long as you can pay the bills and be satisfied with what you got, that's satisfying for me. Generally, the advice for getting into beekeeping is try to take a class. There's a lot to learn. It's not as simple as setting a hive out. Some people do that, but they're forever trying to get a mentor, somebody to talk to and ask questions. So it's really important to get some education under your belt first. And then, because there's laws, we have a bee law, there's food safety laws, there's all kinds of things, and each township or municipality might have different regulations around keeping bees, so you have to be careful of that. But you need to get educated, learn the basics, and then, yeah, if you can hook up with a beekeeper as a mentor that you can ask questions, then that goes a long way. No, currently I'd say the regulations are pretty fair. There's always some conflicts in municipalities where they haven't run into bees before. I know currently we're looking at a change in the bee law, but I'm not even allowed to talk about that. Yeah, so it's all draft at this point. So it may or may not ever happen, but I'm concerned with some of the direction I see in the draft. So it would make, I don't feel like it would make the industry better. Well, the industry, that's, again, I guess you're still talking about agriculture and you're relying on weather and patterns. But I think as a whole, people, just the public, and we've done this for years now, making the public aware of not just honeybees, but pollinators in general. And be careful, like with, using pesticides in your yard or wherever, and even in the home, around the home. So, and don't have to mow everything. It's okay to have some weeds growing with flowers and goldenrod and those things that we find kind of noxious. They're native, but they're noxious. They're good. They're good for the pollinators. I mean, because every insect has kind of a purpose. Honeybees like something that's got a high nectar content, high sugar content, and other ones aren't so much. So, but they're important to set seed of all those plants, pollen movement. One of the biggest stressors is at certain times of the year you don't have enough time to get everything done. It changes so fast and there's not enough hours, and you got to get so many other things done, or there's other things that I don't know. Maybe sometimes I bring these on my own because I'm a volunteer too for other things, for a beekeeping club and state association. Sometimes I bring it on myself, but yeah, just seasonally. Sometimes just we go so fast from snow to swarm season and nectar season, and in between the grass is growing and you can't keep up with it, and you need to start. I do queen rearing for this genetics that I like so much. So, but you have to take time. That's almost a job of its own. Very time dependent, very timely, and it's just running out of time. I think within the beekeeping community, there's good support, because I know if I have a question, I know I do it for others because I've been in it doing it long enough that I have a feel for what it. And there's issues where over time I've just, like, you worry about them going into winter and if they're going to make it out of winter, and at some point you just say, well, it's up to God at this point. I can't stress myself worrying about it because I can't change it. I can't. When April comes, it is what it is, and you just have to trust it and accept whatever outcome there is. But within the beekeeping community, there's good support, some good people that you can bounce questions from, and I think we support ourselves well that way. In a lot of other agriculture, a lot of agriculture understands what we're doing because they're in agriculture and they understand, things are time dependent and weather dependent. Money, I mean, I still spend a lot of money on gas traveling because my hives are spread all over. So that doesn't go away. And then we recently had issues just finding containers. And we had a product and we couldn't get containers. And there's still some of that issue out there. And then I always drag my feet raising prices, like, because you want to keep it affordable for the public, because everybody's under the same stress. I do some pollination, take bees to yards or orchards and stuff, and I probably don't charge what I should, but I charge what I feel it's fair for me. The orchard, the grower can still afford it, and it's good for them because they need it. So I don't want to. I think a lot of agriculture tries to help each other because they all understand that just trying to keep the market prices in check and still pay your bills. The Penn State studies have been interesting. At one point, this is probably 10 years ago. So there was a guy retired out of NASA who was a beekeeper, and he was doing mapping, and he wanted to see if there was a correlation between climate change and yield. So I ended up with a scale which got paid for by somebody else, just a platform scale that I set a hive on. You go out and weigh it every day and send that data into this guy that used to work for NASA, and he doing a spreadsheet. That's some years ago, but it was interesting for me. My conclusions, I don't know if there is a conclusion because every season is different. So this is a dry season, we've got wet seasons. Forage changes around you with agriculture. They don't plant the same thing all the time, and people mow at different times of the year. But at the same time, I've learned a lot about what an individual hive can do in like one day, and it's just phenomenal. So there's another study that also involved weighing the hives. It was a landscape study, which was similar, only it took in more elements. But we ended up with digital scales under the hives. And just a mile from where we're taking this interview, a hive over there that one day in the fall it gained 20 pounds in one day. And I would never have believed it if I didn't see it. So it's a Bluetooth to your smartphone on the scale. And if I didn't see it charted on that, I would have never guessed that happened. But it was over 20 pounds in one day. Generally, a pound is easy, 2 pounds is kind of normal during a good flow. 5 pounds on a good day. I work a lot with Ernst Conservation Seed. So they grow wildflower seeds. And they do a lot of monocropping of these seeds in large plots of it. I'm on a milkweed field right now that it's a crazy thing. I swear they've averaged at 10 pounds a day in a week. They filled 2 boxes in a week, which is about 80 pounds in 7 days. So that's 10 pounds a day. It's like, that's just crazy. And there's still bloom to go. So I threw a couple more boxes on there. That's going to be fascinating. So then you get to this trivia part of, so how much honey does a bee make? So the average bee makes 1/12 of a teaspoon in its lifetime. And I always like, there's a footnote to that, because that's spread out over the course of a year, and a lot of bees don't do anything. But during a honey flow, those bees are just, it's just crazy how much they must be making by themselves in a honey flow. So yeah, everything's got a footnote to it. Yeah, actually that's a good point. In Pennsylvania, we've been doing a loss survey across the state every spring. So in April we do a survey online that says how many we lost. We've been averaging 50% loss like every year for the last 10 or more years. And that impacts us because we're not self-sustainable. We end up buying a lot of bees out of the southern states because they can raise them, get them started earlier. So we're replacing our population a lot out of bees that are brought in from other states, which don't necessarily survive so well in this climate. And plus there's another genetics that you're bringing in and that you don't know, it's an unknown. That's a factor in the industry. And that's where, again, where I go back to this genetic study that I've been involved with. I'd like to see us be more sustainable, self-sustaining in our area, and not have to rely on outside sources for honeybees. So yeah, that's kind of an issue in my opinion. And we always buy bees from the south, but it shouldn't be at 50%. We'll see. We'll see if we can do better. I'm pretty excited about some of the genetics. In fact, I've got 40 queen cells that should hatch in the next couple days.
Oh, that's exciting. Where do you keep them? Are they in a lab somewhere?
Well, no, they're in a hive.
Yeah.
Of course, that's kind of a stress point too, because then it's like, wow, every one of them has to have a home so I can get it mated, and then I'll worry about what I do with them once I get them out and mated. But there's a lot of very timely. So a queen needs to mate within 20 days of it being hatched. Otherwise, it can't mate, and it'll be sterile. So there's a time frame. In the first 10 days, it doesn't want to go out anyway. So you got a smaller window of time when it needs to get mated, and we need to provide that location. Right now, I've got on the Ernst farm, I have that area saturated with good genetics for the drone population, so that we set up our mating boxes there. The queens go out and mate, and hopefully with the genetics, the strong genetics that we're looking at, and we can duplicate that. You know, it's like a jump in an evolution.